Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because honestly, we are diving into what I consider one of the most fascinating topics in all of philosophy. Today, we're setting the stage for a really deep dive into a perennial mystery. Who are we, actually? Like, really? This isn't just about some abstract, dusty ideas. We're talking about the absolute core of your very existence. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive right into this. So let me ask you a question. Are you the exact same person you were 10 years ago? Really think about it. As we grow from a tiny zygote all the way into an adult, the biological cells in our bodies are continually dying off and being completely replaced by new building materials that we get from the food we eat and the water we drink. It's kind of like if you were to replace the battery, the screen, and the logic board of your smartphone over the course of a few years. Is it still the exact same phone? If you physically swap out the very materials that make up you over the years, in what way can you actually claim to be the same being? It totally upends our most basic everyday intuitions about identity and what it means to persist over time. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the dilemma of identity, souls and divine purpose, Eastern views of self, secular notions of self, and finally, we'll wrap up with the famous mind-body problem. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the dilemma of identity, the persistence problem. To really wrap our heads around this dilemma, let's look at a classic, famous thought experiment from antiquity. It's called the Ship of Theseus. Imagine a wooden ship owned by the mythical hero Theseus. Over a span of 1,000 years, seawater rots the wood, accidents happen, and plank by plank, every single piece of decking and wooden content of that ship gets replaced. So if literally 100% of the materials have been swapped out over time, is it functionally the same ship? The name is the same, sure, but the physical reality of it is entirely different. We really want to think of identity as this thing that persists, but this thought experiment forces us to stop and ask, wait, what exactly is it that is persisting? Moving right along to Section 2, souls and divine purpose. Let's look at the Judeo-Christian views. So how do spiritual traditions solve this massive puzzle? Well, the classic Western answer, which traces all the way back to heavy hitters like Plato and St. Thomas Aquinas, is the concept of the soul. And this neatly solves our physical dilemma. If your real self is an eternal, immaterial entity, then it really doesn't matter at all if your biological cells are constantly being replaced. The soul acts as this permanent anchor, providing continuous existence from infancy all the way into the afterlife. Philosophers like Aquinas, who is drawing heavily on Aristotle, argued that God acts as the unmoved mover. That's a necessary being that causes contingent beings, like us, to exist in the first place, assigning us a divine purpose that completely outlasts our constantly changing physical forms. Okay, let's flip the script and look at Section 3, Eastern views of self, specifically Hinduism and Buddhism. First up, we have the Hindu tradition. The key term here is Atman. Now, unlike the Western idea of a soul which is born at a specific time and is strongly, distinctly individuated, Atman is an eternal self or essence that has simply always existed, and it undergoes reincarnation. The ultimate spiritual goal here isn't just to persist forever as a separate, individual person. Not at all. It's to achieve moksha, which is liberation from the whole cycle of reincarnation. And this happens when you realize that Atman is actually united with Brahman, the ultimate force supporting literally all things in the universe. Think of it like a single, isolated drop of water finally realizing that it's actually part of a vast, boundless ocean. Now, in stark contrast to that, we have the Buddhist doctrine of anatman, which literally translates to no self. And guys, this is a radical shift. Buddhism completely denies that there is any autonomous, static, or enduring substance beneath it all. The me that you think you are, it's entirely ephemeral. It's fleeting. So if there is no permanent core, no underlying soul, what exactly are we? Well, Buddhist philosophy argues that we are really just a shifting collection of processes. These are known as the 5 aggregates, or skandhas. We have form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. You are basically just a temporary grouping of these interdependent processes interacting with the world around you. Think of a whirlpool in a river, right? It looks like a distinct, solid, permanent thing, but it's really just a temporary pattern of moving water. You are the verb, not the noun. And this whole idea ties directly into the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. Because we are inherently impermanent, our desperate craving for a permanent identity and our material attachments are what actually cause our suffering, which is known as dukkha. The second step is recognizing this craving, or tanha. The third step teaches that letting go of these cravings, and yes, that includes the craving for a permanent self, is what actually leads to awakening, or nirvana. And finally, you achieve this by living a good, balanced life through the Eightfold Path. Letting go of that illusion of permanence is absolutely key to liberation. All right, let's shift gears again. Section 4, Secular Notions of Self. Let's look beyond theology. To really understand this secular debate, we first need to define the concept of substance. This was a foundational idea popularized by the British philosopher John Locke. Think of the Latin root here, substantia, which means that which supports or stands under. If you look at an oak tree, it obviously has qualities. It has rough bark, green leaves, a certain shape. Locke argued there must be some shared underlying reality, like an ultimate oakness, that is standing under and upholding those visible qualities. Philosophers applied this exact same logic to human identity, suggesting that a core substance is what upholds our personal traits. But then along comes the Scottish philosopher David Hume, and he just totally shatters this idea with his bundle theory. Hume famously stated that the mind is a kind of theater, where several perceptions successively make their appearance. He argued there is absolutely zero underlying substance. When he looked inward, he said he didn't find a static self sitting there, he just found a rapid, perpetual flux of perceptions. Heat, cold, love, anger, just passing through one after another. To Hume, you aren't this solid theater building, you are literally just the bundle of changing scenes playing out on the stage. So the crucial question becomes, if we don't have a soul, and maybe there's no underlying substance at all, what actually connects the you of a decade ago to the you sitting right here today? John Locke offered a really famous thought experiment for this. Imagine the consciousness and the memories of a royal prince were suddenly swapped directly into the physical body of a lowly cobbler. It's basically the ultimate 17th century Freaky Friday scenario. Who is the actual person waking up in the cobbler's shop? Well, Locke argues it's the prince. This perfectly highlights his psychological continuity approach. It's your memory, your reflection, your continuous consciousness that makes you who you are, not your biology. We can also broaden this secular view by looking at anthropological concepts, which show us how culture itself actually creates the self. Take the beautiful African concept of Ubuntu. The proverb translates to, a person is a person through other persons. See, Western thought is super obsessed with this idea of an autonomous, isolated, individual self. But Ubuntu blurs that line entirely, arguing that humanity simply cannot be divided up like that. It's much like a single node in a massive computer network. That node only has purpose and identity because of its connection to the rest of the web. Your identity just does not exist in a vacuum. The self only exists in relation to the surrounding community. And that brings us to our final stop, Section 5, the mind-body problem, the brain versus consciousness. Driven by some massive, game-changing advances in neuroscience, a lot of modern thinkers today adopt what is called physicalism. Physicalism assumes that everything in the universe is, well, physical. In this view, the mind literally just is the biological brain. There is no magical, non-physical ghost hiding in the machine. Every single thought, memory, and feeling you have ever had is just physical brain chemistry and electrical impulses. Why? Because according to this doctrine, a non-physical thing simply cannot cause a physical effect in the body. But hold on a second, because physicalism has a pretty major challenger, and it's called qualia. Qualia are those incredibly vivid, first-person, subjective experiences of consciousness. If you have a terrible, throbbing toothache, or even just a catchy tune stuck in your head, a neuroscientist can look at a scan and describe exactly which C fibers are firing away in your brain. But just describing that physical chemistry doesn't fully capture what it actually feels like for you to be in pain, right? Physicalism really struggles to explain the actual subjective experience of an experience. To try and solve this disconnect, the French philosopher René Descartes gave us substance dualism. He argued that to truly explain the self, we have to accept that there are two entirely distinct, irreducible realities. First, you have the mind, which is the thinking thing, and second, you have the body, which is the extended, mechanical, completely non-thinking thing. Descartes argued that your identity is tied strictly to that thinking thing, completely separate from the biological machine it happens to operate. Now, if you find that dualism stuff a little too mystical for your liking, you might actually appreciate behaviorism. The behaviorist counterargument bypasses that whole hidden mind problem entirely. Hard behaviorists argue that internal mental states don't even exist in any meaningful, measurable way. Instead of trying to play a guessing game about what's happening in some invisible mind, they say we should rely entirely on observable human activity and physical actions to understand a person. Simply put, you are what you do. I want to wrap up today's explainer with one last, totally mind-bending thought experiment just to test your own intuitions on all of this. It's called Mary's Room. Imagine Mary is this brilliant scientist who knows literally every single physical fact there is to know about how color vision works in the human brain. But here's the catch. She has spent her entire life locked away in a purely black and white room. One day, the door opens, she walks out, and she sees a bright red apple for the very first time in her life. Now, since she already knew all the scientific physical facts about the color red, does she learn something fundamentally new when she actually experiences seeing it? If you say yes, well, you might be admitting that physicalism isn't the whole story and that there is something deeply, inherently unquantifiable about consciousness and the self. I will leave you to chew on that one. Thank you so much for joining me on this